capable, being free. So trying to settle down those thoughts there. What tools or practices can you recommend or counsel that people think about before walking into those kinds of situations so that they can be more equipped or better capable of keeping that noise from going on in their heads at the same time they're trying to both negotiate and talk about the creative project in the end that they're being commissioned to do?
Well, you have to breathe. And
thank you for telling me that now.
A lot of times, yeah. A lot of times we're really not breathing and or very shallow breath. And so if you find yourself getting really anxious, I always say that's the first thing to do. Is just if you're about to walk into a meeting and you do feel anxious, is just stop and take 3 deep breaths. And it centers you. It brings you back. And that can be before you're going into the meeting, and that could be in the grocery store line. It doesn't matter.
Probably more important in the grocery store line or in traffic sometime.
It is. I do it. I have to do it in the grocery store line. I'll admit it. But so that's one thing. And then the whole, I think when I think about presence, I'm like, it's just like meeting the moment. Just meet it. Don't have the mental screenplay. You're going to go into that meeting and you might have an idea about what's going to happen. And sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. And I think the more we operate from the place where we've got it all figured out, it's just like it's not really a positive thing. I think we stump our creativity when we do that. And so a lot of times it's just like, I'm just going to meet the moment. I'm just going to go in there. I'm prepared. I have what I need to bring to this meeting or to this discussion. And let me just listen.
Right.
And respond from that place instead of already having the script written. Things change when you start operating like that.
I've done some improv comedy work, and that yes, being willing to just take the moment and accept it and flow with it. But it's not a comfortable place for people to walk in and feel like that's where they can be at their best.
Yes, not at first. It takes practice. Again, we are not functioning in this way. You have to practice. And the more you practice meeting the moment, the easier it becomes. And then before you know it, you're functioning in a whole new way.
Right.
And because you're functioning in a whole new way, you have new outcomes.
I catch my mind a lot of times racing like a NASCAR event with my thoughts flying around the track, competing for attention with each other. By making myself focus on them without judgment or editing, just observing them in relation to each other, I find it's an interesting process of figuring out what my anxiety is and then refocusing my attention. But there are times where I question, is it better just to breathe, be calm, and try to notice what is, or whether to dig in with more of deep questioning? Where does the process of simply observing without judgment and the process of deliberate inquiry, asking yourself those thoughtful questions, which you seem to do a lot in your work, where do they fit together or overlap in that process of discovery?
I approach this by looking at it as, we should get in the habit as much as possible to just notice things, right, without judgment. And that's not just for ourselves, but that's other people. That's just in our day-to-day existence. I think we have to ask deeper questions when something is coming up over and over and over again. When something is coming up over and over again, there's something greater that we need to learn from it. And so we have to get to the heart of what that is. One of the things that I do with my clients is I really make them, I dig until they can clearly explain it. Because what I've found is that a lot of times we have different phrases,
right,
or however, it could be 3 words, or it could be a paragraph or a story that we tell ourselves. And it's actually not what's going on. And so the more that we dig,
right,
we get to the heart of what it really is. And that level of clarity changes stuff, because
Right.
you can't let go of anything until you know what you need to learn from it. So that's why it's coming up over and over again. It's like letting life teach you.
Right.
I
remember reading a number of years ago, an author was talking about the deep wounds that we have, kind of the arrows in our hearts, and the need to not just ignore them and hope they'll go away, but to actually, in a sense, push them on through, get them out, and find out what's there. And also had another word picture for it was we often hide a lot of our narratives or hide a lot of that stuff in a trunk deep in this locked up room in the basement. And he said you need to go in, unlock it, open the trunk, and pull out all of that stuff and just deal with it, because you're never going to get over it until you've just exposed it to light.
That's right.
Dealt with it, and then you can move on free. But as long as it's there, hidden, it has a power.
Because you're resisting it.
Right.
That's just it. I mean, you don't have to unload it all at the same time, right? But I think that's, I feel like we're evolving until the end, right? So as things are coming up and they come up more and more, then that's probably something that we need to work through at that time. It could be big, it could be small, whatever. But you're exactly right. When we are resisting something, it's a lot more powerful. As soon as we let something be there, it loses its power.
Right.
And then when you face it and you kind of say, okay, what do I really need to learn from this? Then you can let it go. I feel like the whole let it go, and we see this everywhere, in that movie Frozen, there's a reason why the song was so popular, right? I mean, it really struck something from age 5 until, whatever. And
yes,
I think, letting things go is great, but I think we're too focused on saying that, but we don't really know what we need to let go of. So it's like shifting our focus to discovering what we need to actually let go of, like becoming more aware, and then we can actually let go of it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's something that I feel a lot of times. I'm like, okay, we spend a lot of time saying those words, but we're not talking about, let's just, become more aware of what it is that we each need to let go of, because we all have different stuff. So, that's where self-awareness is key. It's huge.
Right.
You got to cultivate it.
Well, as you say that, what jumps to mind is that in the social media world, we're so focused on presenting our narrative or a version of our narrative to the world, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, of a life that is so whole, complete, and lovely and beautiful and flawless that we begin to think that narrative should be real as opposed to being honest. And I see why and understand why you can't be fully honest with all of your guts out to the world. One needs to be discerning, but to recognize that's not really who you are, and a well-rounded person has garbage and baggage to deal with, and go ahead and acknowledge that and deal with that instead of burying that narrative or pretending that narrative is not also a part of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
and again,
I think
just deal with that narrative.
I don't know about you, but I've read numerous articles and heard different things about how we're more connected than ever, but people are becoming depressed from social media and feeling very isolated, right? And I think has a lot to do with what you just said.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And I don't think the world needs more stories that people are portraying. I think the world is craving more truth. And like you said, you're not going to air everything, but life isn't perfect and it's not supposed to be. And that's fine, right?
Absolutely.
So
In my experience, I found that the work that many professionals do for other people is often lacking or wanting in their own life. You've probably heard the expression that the shoemaker's children are the ones without shoes. Is there an area of your life in which you struggle with particular fears or anxiety that cause your mind to race? How does your anxiety show up?
Well, I used to have fear, a pretty big fear of failing. I've come a long way with that. I've actually gotten pretty damn good at it, I think.
Good. That's a behavior change specialist.
That's a behavior change specialist. And a lot of that was learning how to develop compassion. I can be a perfectionist, and I kind of learned that I was really hard on myself. And so learning how to be more compassionate has made it a lot easier for me to fail. And I feel like as long as my choices, I'm making conscious choices that feel good, that if, however it comes out on the other side, I'm okay with that. So that's definitely been something that I've dealt with. I've also have a fear of success. A lot of people don't talk about fear of success, but
right.
Yes, that's one for me.
Yeah, I've struggled a lot with the fear of success. And I had a friend who actually dropped away from being the possibility of being a professional photographer because of fear as he was succeeding. What would his family think of him, or what would the people around him, that he was getting beyond himself, and it just kept him from growing and creating. And I was amazed because he's a talented, very talented person, still is, but I think that fear of growing out of, he would have had to have grown beyond his community of support, his peers, and that was too hard for him to do. And it was the first time that I saw it, and so raw, and as a result, it caused me to look at it in myself as well. I think it's greater than the fear of failure.
Yes.
In my view.
It has been for me. Yeah.
What is the value of journaling or writing down those raw thoughts as you observe them or sitting with them?
You see patterns. If we don't capture our thoughts, it's very difficult to remember everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So journaling or writing things down, you begin to see thought patterns, again, maybe things that are just coming up over and over again. And so we're cultivating more self-awareness, and then we know, like, what's serving me, like what's not serving me, like what do I need to let go of? It can come up in different ways. And the more that we stay connected to that, I just feel like we stay on the right path for ourselves. And actions like this, like journaling, asking yourself simple questions that can really get to the heart of what's going on, save us a lot of pain later on. Because what happens is, if we're not really connected to what's going on, it builds. And all of a sudden one day we're like, got this big pile, and we've got a lot of stuff to work through, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we can get ahead of that, it's easier to kind of just take things as they come than to have an entire pile to go through. So
yeah, I find more than a pile, mine seems to be a mountain of stuff that I'm constantly crawling up and pushing up. So the Sisyphean task of rolling the boulder up that mountain and doing the work. And so, yeah, I started on social media a couple of years ago doing a question of the day to dig into things, because it was part of my discovery of asking better questions. And I realized if I wanted to ask better questions, I simply needed to learn how to ask more questions and filter through that process. And the more I've done that and journaled and worked with not only the questions I ask publicly, but I kind of as a journal just write down questions as they come to me, or as I'm reading.